Today on Callahan's Garage, we're out in the shop, we're hot, we're sweaty, we're absolutely melting, but we got part 2 of the Hearse build coming up and we're gonna get the whole front end put together.
Hey, I'm Callahan. Welcome to Callahan's Garage.
Alright folks, welcome back to Callahan's Garage. My name is Callahan and today we are on part 2 of the Hearse build. So in the last video, we did all of the disassembly on this thing. We got all of our old suspension out, all of our exhaust out. We got absolutely everything ripped out from under this thing, so we got a blank canvas to move forward with. So on today's video, we've got kind of a culmination of a couple weeks worth of work where we're getting parts in, prepping stuff, getting everything ready, and because this is all happening in real time. It took me a little longer to get this video out than I wanted to, but this isn't reality TV. This is happening a couple days a week when I'm able to get out here. So today we've got all of our front end stuff. We're going to get disassembled, we're going to sandblast it, we're going to powder coat it, and then we're going to start putting all this stuff back together so we can get our front end done. Alright, so we're back out here on the Hearse today, and next thing we're going to do is start prepping all of our control arms and everything for powder coat. So we need to get these totally torn down, we'll get these sandblasted and ready to go. So first thing we need to do, we'll get this nasty old ball joint out of here, we'll rip this little bump stop off, we'll scrape all the grease off of here, and we'll get this thing sandblasted up. Alright, there we go. Nice clean lower control arms. So now we can take these over to the workbench and we can weld on our lower bag mounts. Okay, so we got our lower control arms all cleaned up. I've got my lower bag mounts all prepped. I've marked where this is going to weld to my control arms. I'm going to clean this up real quick and then we'll weld these on here. Okay, so we got that cleaned up. Now I'm going to measure this, make sure it's in place, and then we'll weld it in. Safety first. Please don't our arms. Still got my chip shorts on because it's hot. Alright, there we go. All fully welded up, nice and solid, top and bottom. That's not going anywhere. Now I'm going to bang out the other control arm real quick. Same treatment, sandblast, weld our bracket on. Then we can jump onto our front control arm. So these, we got the same things to do. Press our ball joints out, press our old control arm bushings out. We'll get these things all sandblasted and cleaned up. These are a little crustier, so hopefully they look okay after we blast them up. We'll see. So we've started tearing down our front upper control arms. I got one of the ball joints pressed out. And this was a little more challenging than I was expected. I'm not sure if this is totally correct, but the upper ball joint has 2 welds on the ball joint. So the ball joint is tacked to the socket in the control arm. So first thing I've got to do is I've got to cut these two little welds loose. And then when I went to press the ball joint out, this thing just ends up flopping over. So what I ended up having to do was cut the stem of the ball joint off. Then we could get a good fit up on our press and get this thing knocked out of here. So I'm going to cut these loose and then we'll go press this one out. Okay, so finally got our control arms apart. It's almost got the better of me here. So what I had to do is press our main pivot shaft out, halfway out one side and kind of pull the bushing material out, and then half out the other side and do the same thing. And then I was able to kind of chisel out our little bushing housing here. So I was really concerned about mangling up these control arms trying to push this stuff out, but came out, you know, relatively painlessly. So we're gonna get these all blasted up and cleaned up, then we'll be finished up. All right, folks, so we got all of our front end parts torn down and prepped, and now we have all this stuff back from powder coat. So we got all nice new clean parts with this nice fancy gold powder coat. It's gonna match our wheels really nicely. So we are almost ready to start putting new parts back onto the hearse, but we've got one more thing to do before we do that. Okay, so the last thing we need to do before we start throwing new parts into here is we need to address this front frame section on both sides of the car. So mainly we need to get all this scaly rust and everything cleaned off of here. Mostly so it doesn't continue to rust, but also so that it looks nice and new and fresh up under here with all of our new suspension components. The other thing we need to do is this car originally had coil springs in the front. And like I said, we're putting air ride onto this car. So when you hear people talk about bags or air ride or airbag suspension, this is what they're talking about. So this is an air spring. And then basically we're just taking this coil spring out, we're putting this air spring up in to replace it. And what happens when this air spring inflates and lifts up, it also expands. So this pocket that our coil spring sits up into is a little too narrow for this air spring. So what we've got to do is we've got to come in here and just kind of clearance this frame out a little bit so that it doesn't rub on our bag when this thing is cycling up and down in here. Okay, so we've got all of our cutting and clearancing on our frame section up here done. I took my little bump stop bracket, cut it off, so that just gives us a little bit of extra clearance here between our control arm when this thing is aired all the way out. And then I've got the interior portion of our spring pocket right here. So basically this just sat right here, and I've cut it and pulled it out. And you can see that gives us, you know, about 1.5 inches and almost 2 inches in some spaces of clearance inside of this spring pocket here. A lot of people, when they do this, instead of cutting along this bottom edge right here, they'll come up and cut into the outside of our frame rail right here. I've done a couple of these cars now, and I don't like to do it that way. Doing it this way, it takes a little bit longer. It's a little bit trickier to get in here and cut it, but it leaves this entire outboard section of our frame rail intact. And then it also leaves this bottom radius on the frame rail intact. So I've got about 1/4 inch of material on the bottom of my frame rail right here. So that keeps this whole radius intact and keeps a lot of the structure on the bottom of our frame rail right here. So, you know, this isn't really gonna be impacted by having this little bit of section cut out. We've still got plenty of strength and structure right here in our frame, and we've got all that clearance we need for our air spring. So the next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna yank this little brake line out of the way. I'm gonna grab my wire wheels and my brushes and sander and everything. We're gonna go and we're gonna clean this whole frame section up here, get it nice and fresh, all this scaly rust moved off of here. That way we can paint this thing here in a little bit. Okay, so we got our frame section up here all cleaned up. I hit all of this with the wire wheel and then hit it all again with 80 grit. So we got a nice clean surface now, so we can get some primer and then some paint on here, and this will look much nicer. So now I'm gonna go do all the same stuff to the other side, and then we can start spraying some paint on this. And there we go. We got some nice fresh paint all up in here on both sides. The fender liners here, these are just super dirty. These are actually fully undercoated already, and if I had planned ahead, I would have pressure washed and scrubbed all this nice and clean. And then we also have another fender liner piece that clips in right here. I'm gonna get that all cleaned up and put back in as well. But for now, we're gonna let this paint dry and we'll get some fresh parts going in this thing tomorrow. Okay, so we got our front frame section painted up. We're almost ready to start putting new parts together. So we got our lower control arms, we got our upper control arms all nice and powder coated. But before we put these in the car, we've got brand new ball joints, we've got brand new bushings for the uppers and the lowers. So we're gonna get all that put together and then we can put them in the car. Okay, so I already got my ball joints pressed into my lower control arms, and now we're going to look at the upper control arms, and the ball joints on these are a little bit different. So on the lower control arms is the same ball joint, same part number from both sides, just press them in, easy peasy. On the upper control arms, they are specific to each side, and you can see, you know, the way the ball joint is made, it's kind of, it only has a range of motion in a certain way, so you want to make sure you don't mix these up. So I'm going to put this one, I'm going to press this one together and set it over on the driver's side. I'm going to do the other one, set it over on the passenger side. That way I don't get them mixed up. And now our ball joint's pressed in here, and the boot on these is kind of weird. It actually threads onto the body of the ball joint here. So this will just screw on here. We can add our grease fitting into the back of this thing. Done. Okay, so when I'm doing the passenger side control arm here, I realized that this boot is actually two separate pieces. So there's a collar and then the boot. So on this one, you know, made sure I chiseled this really nice and tight. There's a special tool you're supposed to have to tighten this, but I don't have it. So like I said, just used a hammer and a punch, got this collar super tight. Then our boot goes on top of this. I'm gonna go grab the other one and make sure that it's good and tight too. Okay, so we got all our control arms put together, ready to go. I'm gonna hang these up in here, and then we can put our spindle on here, and it'll look like we're actually getting something done. I got my hardware all freshened up. Alright, finished installing both of our control arms. We got our upper control arms, new bushings, ball joints fully installed. Lower control arms swung down out of the way right now. Before I put the spindle on here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install my front airbag. So let's go take a look at those. Okay, so this is our whole front airbag setup. So we've got our air spring, we've just got a basic cup mount. This mount bolts to the top of the bag. We've got our air fitting in here. We've got a mount stud on top, and all of this just fits up into that factory spring pocket and secures with a nut and a washer on the top. So it's very simple, very straightforward, basic setup. So I've got this side all together. I'm gonna get our other bag together and then we'll go put them in the car. Okay, so we're ready to put the bag in on this side, and I've reconfigured this a little bit just to kind of simplify a lot of this. So in the past, I've put the airline in through the top of the spring pocket into a straight fitting on the top of the bag. This just isn't really lining up for that to work right, so I put a 90-degree fitting in here. I drilled me a hole in the side of my spring cup here, so I'm going to run the airline on top of the frame rail right here into the side of my factory spring pocket, and then I'll run right into the top of my spring cup here and go into our fitting. So when you install this, the first thing you have to do is hook up this airline, because once this is all up into that spring pocket, we don't have any way to access this fitting and hook that airline up. So I can hook my airline up, make sure that gets good and seated on there, and then all we need to do is feed this up in here. Get that right into place. Our airline, it looks good. It's not pinching or anything. And then we just need to put our nut and our washer on the top of here. And that's in there. We'll get that tightened up and it'll be good to go. Okay, so all wrapped up. We got both of our control arms installed, hooked up to our spindles. We're mounted top and bottom. We got our airline kind of pre-run here. It's going to run right on top of our frame rail right here, so it'll look really nice and clean and out of the way, away from the exhaust. Then we're also going to put some clamps on this. We'll put some heat shield over this airline so it's nice and safe and secure and everything. So now I'm going to go and do all the same stuff to the other side. Okay, so we got all of our control arms and spindles installed on both sides now. The next thing we need to install is these front strut bars. So these tie our lower control arms in up to the front frame section and takes all of this front and back slop out of here. So we've got new bushings and stuff for these. We'll get these installed. Okay, so we got our new wheel bearings installed and our new rotors and hubs here. We got our dust shields on. I don't have my calipers on yet. I'm going to try to run the Willwood GM bolt-on calipers, but I'm not sure if they're going to clear my wheels or not yet, so I need to do a little more research and figure that out before I order them. But next thing, I've got all new steering stuff. So we've got a new center link and new tie rods. So I'm going to get those in here, and then we'll be just about wrapped up with the front end. All right, so I got my center link installed. I had to sandblast and paint my tie rod adjuster. So while those are drying, what better time to throw a wheel up on here and see how this thing's gonna look. And there we go. There is our fully aired out height. And it doesn't look super crazy with our small wheel and tire combo, but I put a straight edge across our bottom of our frame rail and across our front cross member. And the bottom of the tire is like within a 1/4 inch of that. So this thing is going to be absolutely hammered on the ground. And actually the exhaust is currently hanging lower than the bottom of our tire is. So we're going to have to do something about that. But this thing is going to, it's going to be low. So pretty much wrapped up with the front up here. I think I'm gonna call it a day on that, but in the next video, we're gonna get the whole rear together. We're gonna get the management together. We've still got exhaust. We've got a transmission cross member. We still got a bunch of work to do to this thing. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out and you get to see this thing absolutely smack down on the pavement when we're done.